The time is September 1979 when early in his career, Richard Gere put in the romance in Time of War, in a movie about a group of American GIs who are stationed in Europe before heading to the front lines. As the soldiers prepare for battle, they form relationships with local British women, deal with world and local public opinion, separations, racism, emotional turmoil caused by war, but also women dealing with the challenges of their marriages and the impact of the soldiers' presence in their lives. This week on Back to the Balcony, we talk about 1979's Yanks.
Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, two titans of cinematic review. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong, but always captivating. Your hosts Antonio of the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast and Justin Henson of the Movie Wire are here to take you back to the balcony.
All right, so this is one of those that when I picked this one took me by surprise because I think we had a discussion about this one where I didn't even know I picked this one. This was like a 2 a.m. pick for me because when you saw it on the list, it was a rarity for me to pick a war movie because, open and honest, I don't like addressing war movies. These are one and done films for me where I don't like to revisit them. I don't like to necessarily watch them because it is a heavy topic and there is a lot of emotion being brought to it. So this one was a surprise when I put this on the list. But when I went back to look at Roger and Gene's review, it made me understand why I picked this one because it is a rarity for a film of this magnitude, of the topics, the themes, for a movie critic to kind of not be a complete fan of that we'll get into later. And I gotta say, I wasn't a complete fan either. But I will tell you this is one that has an appreciation. I'll pull an Antonio here. There is a lot of appreciation to this movie. The cinematography, the direction is amazing. The actual score by Richard Rodney Bennett is a Casablanca-like feel to it. It's old-fashioned. So I loved all the old-fashioned themes to it, but I hated how it dealt with conflict. It went to the romance aspect of it versus dealing with conflicts at hand. So I'm torn between this movie, and I'm actually dying to hear what your thoughts are so far.
This is kind of the reason why I'm absolutely in love with this month and probably the next month or two that we are going into these films that we have very little knowledge of, probably haven't even heard of, just literally pulled things out of their catalog from the Siskel and Ebert show and sneak previews and at the movies that we had never even really had in our zeitgeist. So I'm the same, man, with war movies. I'm just not a war movie guy, one and done. I've seen Private Ryan maybe twice, and I don't ever have to watch it again. I'm fine with it. Vietnam movie's a different story. Like Full Metal Jacket, I'll watch that because it's more than a war movie, right? This, to me, though, was a really pleasant surprise. It really was. It is a one and done. Like, I'll probably never watch it again. But the 2 hours and 20 minutes that I did watch this film in one sitting, I didn't split it up into multiple viewings or whatever, like I've had to do with some movies. I actually really, really liked it. I liked Richard Gere's performance. I liked William Devane's performance. Their complaints later on in the critique are totally valid. I think the reason why I liked this movie so much is that it was very personal to the filmmaker, and you could feel that in the filmmaking. And that is where I will take a step back in the appreciation factor more than the critic factor and be like, I will really respect a labor of love film from a filmmaker, especially one who is British, who probably came of age during this era and had gotten lost in the sea of New Hollywood, right? Like John Schlesinger is British, but he is a major face of New Hollywood, especially with Paramount making movies like Marathon Man, big budget, big audience drawing blockbusters of the time. That's what really got him his name. And so for him to take all that success and a $6 million budget and make a very intimate, personal period piece about the culture wars of GIs in Britain who are like there temporarily, but looking for some kind of escape to escape the mundane and the fear of what is coming next in World War II, I was really, really touched by it. And the performances are really good. So where I will agree with the critics later on that the film does suffer pacing issues and story issues, I don't think for 1 second does it suffer any character development issues. I think that's its strongest suit. And I'm a sucker for that. And the score, and like they comment later, the presentation. The fact that England is a very wet, kind of barren but lush place, and the cinematography emphasizes that, where it's almost a character itself. So while I was not fully entertained, I was immersed. And that's kind of where I'm at with the movie. And we'll go into more of the details in the conversation, but that's where I was at. I kind of let you know, I'm like, dude, I think I like this more than I should. And looking at other people's reviews, yeah, not a lot of people like this movie. It was a bomb at the box office. It's got some defenders, and most of them are defending the same things that I'm defending. So I know I'm in good company when it comes to that part.
It's hard to disagree with anything that you just said, because this is the lullaby of war movies. This is, I hate to contradict it, but a sweet war movie, right? The performances, the technicalities, the cinematography is beautiful, and I 100% agree. This was a director's passion project. You can tell from the elongated landscape shots. He took his time with it, and that's where a majority of the runtime really goes, is with the scenic shots, is with the up close and intimate up close shots with the characters. So this one, he really took in the environment, and there will be no disagreement, I think, here that this is a beautiful looking movie and a well directed looking movie. But when it comes to how the pacing is that you touched on, that's where it flaws. The storytelling flaws, the conflict resolution flaws. So there are flaws to this movie, but this one, it's hard for me to just bash on it because it is a beautiful movie. It is one that the first viewing, I've watched this now 3 times. The first viewing, I was laying down and it was almost hypnotic just listening to the score, watching the scenic views and watching the subtle performances that just really took me back to films of the 40s. And I think that's where our director really wanted us to go, is back to traditional movies of the 40s of the feel with a war feel. And that's what I really do respect about this, is it adds a lot of different nostalgic directorial styles in at the time almost a modern war kind of feel. So there is a lot to like about this movie, but many will be lost in the lack of story and the pacing.
I'll tell you where the movie won me over. It won me over in the first 20 minutes because the first 20 minutes are very different than the rest of the movie. The first 20 minutes, I thought this was essentially MASH. It's funny. You were introduced to a lot of quirky GI characters. The fact that they're like out in a public shower, they're flirty with the British nurses and the British food pantry ladies, right? There's a lot of comic and whimsy. And while Richard Gere is the straight man, literally almost every other soldier in his unit is straight out of MASH. They're straight out of the 4077, right? Like his little friend, Chick Venero, who plays Danny Raffello, he may as well be like the Hawkeye to his Trapper, right? Like there is a strong chemistry there. We get a young John Ratzenberger in there for a few minutes, kind of throwing out some one-liners. Like I got a real strong MASH vibe, and that's what brought me into it, right? So then when it transformed into a love story, I wasn't as resistant to it because I was already lubed up for the movie. I think that was a very clever way to do it. Like show that these guys are just kind of getting there. They're really sarcastic. They're really kind of flippant of the culture because they don't know where they're going yet. Like they're literally like at a holdover until they actually see battle. And that to me is part of the movie that I think gets overlooked in the critique, is that there's this ever-present feeling that everything is temporary and the shoe's going to drop at any moment. So even though these romance scenes are long and lingering, they spend a lot of time with like the family and the xenophobia, so to speak, of the Yanks in their presence. It almost builds like this underlying tension of this could end at any second. And we want this romance to work, at least in the time being, because that is where it gets into like the melodrama, right? Where we do have these two different stories being told. One gets more attention than the other. And I think that is a detriment to the story. They really should have just picked the one. So we've got the William Devane, who's like the supply sergeant. He's been there a little bit longer, and he's had like this ongoing kind of relationship with Vanessa Redgrave. These two are great. It's a great performance. We really care about them, but they're interspersed throughout the movie so like liberally that we don't get to really feel for their story because we're drawn back to the gorgeous Richard Gere and his love interest, Lisa Eichhorn, who plays Jean Morton. And she's great too, but it does feel a little distracting that we are switching between these two love stories. They're both sweet. They both got me in the feels, but I feel like one was paid more attention than the other, and that kind of disrupted the energy of the movie. In fact, when they switched to the William Devane and Vanessa Redgrave romance, I just kind of wanted to get back, not even to the main romance, but to the side characters because they were so entertaining. The mother, the father, the little brother, they're all great. The other nurse units, they're all hilarious. The women are great. And there is this one moment in the middle of the movie where they are like at this like a USO kind of dance, right? And there is a racial fight between GIs, the African American GIs, and of course some Southern boy GIs that are there, and they're fighting amongst each other because the African American guys are dancing with the white girls. So there is that, okay, there was also this conflict within our own ranks. There still are, I'm sure. That was interesting. It was really interesting, but just like an Altman film, just like MASH, it doesn't really feel like it's a main part of the story. It's like a patchwork of scenes. And some people are cool with it and some people aren't. I think Altman uses that patchwork of scenes to his advantage because it's what he's known for. But in a film that's not expected to be that way, it does feel out of place.
Well, it's either out of place or it didn't go far enough.
Right.
It didn't prolong the conflict. And that's where I think the issue was. Because when it comes to William Devane and Redgrave's relationship, that's what I really wanted more of. Because I think 100% right that we don't get a proper balance between the two relationships. Each one of these characters have a moment that stick in my head. You have Richard Gere and Eichhorn at the hotel sipping drinks after the racist fight. You have Devane and Redgrave in that moment of intimacy at the USO kind of bar, or I don't know what to call it, but they have that single date where they just compliment their and put a stamp on their relationship of what it is. Each one of these relationships have a moment, but when it comes to Devane's character, I wanted more of that because he is such a unique character. He's an authoritarian in this war, in this unit, and it was interesting to me that we didn't get more of that to show kind of the bias of sergeant versus captain, almost to show that these are human characters on the outside of the uniform, that these are men that really do have an emotional stake in women that they meet. There is an emotional element here that is never truly explored. And I think that is my biggest disappointment here, is that we never really get a satisfying conclusion. And even up to the climax, we don't get a conclusion. And even with these individual relationships, we don't get a satisfactory conclusion to it. And that's where it really loses almost the romance that is trying to entice. Is these characters are obviously damaged characters, one stronger than the other, but at the end of the day, they're both individually strong in their own self. And they never really come together to complement each other's internal conflicts or their internal defects, I would say. This is a time of war that we have to believe, if this is what they're going through in a story, that they're relying on each other than just what almost I was sitting back saying, okay, when is the sex scene going to happen? Because we're leading up to it but I don't feel it's earned when we finally get there when it comes to the intimacy.
See, and I disagree with that. I think that the buildup is actually quite. It's the buildup is enticing in the sense that like it's not your traditional machismo, right? Like Richard Gere shows several moments of humility where he actually has like this strong conscience over him of like, I do not want to disrupt this woman's, she's like essentially engaged to a dude who's already off to war. And he almost doesn't go through with it. And you see the pain in her because here she is about to like betray the man that she's betrothed to have this moment of intimacy with him. And he like rejects her at first. Now, this is pre-80s. This is pre-Officer and a Gentleman, right? So this isn't what we expect Richard Gere to be. I loved that. And when it comes to like the intimacy between Devane and Redgrave, I think there's something very transactional about that one. And I like that because these are both people who have like lived and they both have spouses. And you can tell that Devane is ready for some kind of romance because his wife is on the verge of leaving him. She sold the house. He knows that something's going on. And meanwhile, Redgrave is just lonely. And that is what I like about how this is a war movie, but not necessarily because the war is internal. The war is all interpersonal with these characters. It's not about the battle. It's not about seeing maimed bodies coming in from the battlefield into these hospitals and whatever. It's literally people at war with themselves and what they want, where Richard Gere's character is so just determined to not be where he's from. He doesn't want the family business. He doesn't want to go back. He wants to open motels across the country. He wants to just get away. And Eichhorn, who plays Jean, she wants just someone there, right? And you can tell that she doesn't want to go to America with him. The fantasy is there. The idea is there. But at the end of the day, she knows that she's a British girl and she wants to stay there. They both know that this time is fleeting, as do Devane and Redgrave. They both know that at some point they're going to have to go on with their lives. I think that's the real war and the real tragedy of the movie. And I'm a sucker for it because it's a movie where no one wins. Yes, there's an ambiguity of that ending. And I liked the ending personally. It is a little melodramatic, but I kind of liked it because it's ambiguous, but it's not. We know they're probably never going to see each other again. And that's fine. That's kind of what this is all about. And I can see some people who want the happy ending be upset about it. Like, what? There wasn't like a run to the train station and they're going to hold each other and kiss each other. That's not what this movie is about. So I think it depends on what kind of romantic you are at heart and how you're going to interpret this movie. So I liked the interpersonal battles. I like the fact that it's not about love. It's about just belonging and wanting. And you're in an environment where your future is uncertain because it's war.
No, and I get all that. And I think when it comes to the scene with Richard Gere and he's being intimate for the first time, I like that. But it's the build, because I think what I had a problem with is the scene prior to that is when we have Jean saying, you didn't try and stop it. There's a morality question here, and it's never addressed at that point. These are two people, and that's just an example, but these are two people that are getting to know each other. And we have a great scene with Jean and her family, with Richard Gere bringing a cake. I love all that stuff, but it almost feels like they're avoiding the build, avoiding the conversation before that intimacy happens. Because even when we get to that hotel scene where she questions why he didn't do anything, it doesn't go anywhere. And even if that means Richard Gere being numb to the times of war, that's fine. But give us something a little bit more. And that's where I think the intimacy of the randomness of this situation really could have gone further. It really could have resonated with people of the late 80s or early 80s when it comes to how we speak to each other, how we communicate, how we deal with our internal conflicts, because this is a time where I get it. Men, if we want to go down that route, really hold in their emotions. But this is a chance for an example that you can't tell me that every single man in that era didn't fall in love in a time of conflict and war and didn't spout out his most internal secrets or his internal wants. There could have been more here to set the example of realism, because this is a time of war. There's fear, there's a different environment, there's a new woman that's also dealing with a bunch of separation and anxiety and a lot of loneliness, as you spoke to. So there is a lot of depth here that doesn't get explored. And what I do appreciate about it, and again, I think this is with the direction, is we try and stick to the classic feel. We try and stick to the classic romance piece of it, where none of that doesn't matter. It's about the girl and the guy and a romance. So, and we don't get anything prior to underneath that. We don't get anything underneath the surface. And when we get to that train station at the end, I agree with you. I love that scene because, again, I resonated with the movies that made me smile of the 40s and 50s that I fell in love with, because it was nostalgic. And I love that. And that's part of the direction I loved. And that's part of the writing I loved of that, is that it holds to tradition of old movies. But in 1979, this is where it needed to be amplified a little bit to still hold that nostalgic factor, but hold to times of that era and still make it contemporary.
No, I agree with you on that. Like, it does feel out of place for 1979. It feels like a lot older movie. It really does. Just the way it's made, the way it flows, and all of the themes that our critics talk about when we get to the reviews. It doesn't have to be 2 hours and 20 minutes, that's for sure. It was too long. There was a lot of padding in the movie that didn't have to be there. I'd say my biggest disappointment of the movie, and maybe it was something that was in the original vision of the film, is that for me to really care about William Devane and Richard Gere more, they should have had a relationship with each other. There should have been conflict, or there should have been a connection between the two of them, because otherwise they're two ships in the night, right? Like, neither of them has any idea what the hell the other one's doing. And if you would have had a connection between them where, like, even if they shared like a scene at a bar, like just one scene of like, wow, like, you're in love with this girl. Yeah, I got a thing too. That would have at least helped that development a little bit more and made us care about these characters and the paths they were on. But for some reason, the writer and the director keep these two storylines so parallel to each other where they don't even cross paths. Like, Vanessa Redgrave has like no idea that there's anything going on with this other couple. If anything, she's more involved with Molly, who is the friend and the eventual wife of Danny, the friend of Richard Gere. Like, those two end up hooking up and getting married, and we see that kind of interaction, right? But they really don't have any crossover between Devane and Gere, and I think that's a huge mistake, because it doesn't make us feel connected to either of those characters when we are switching back and forth between these stories. And I get it. I get the point is like, this could be a film that all ages could love, right? Where the older folks are going to really attach themselves to the William Devane and Vanessa Redgrave story, and then the younger kids are going to love the romance between Richard Gere and Lisa Eichhorn. But it doesn't really work that way, because one is heavily favored over the other. That is a drawback.
And I think this is where it really needed to tie something together. And we said it before, to have a moment, because in a way it almost doesn't make sense. Like, these two guys are on different levels. And when I first did my first watch on this, I thought these two, between Gere and Devane, were going to kind of come together in a relatable factor. And we get hints of that when Devane kind of disciplines him on the fight, taking his stripes away. And I said, okay, this is going to lead to something where they're going to go on common ground, where it's not authoritarian sergeant against captain or whatever it may be. There is a purpose to this conversation. There's a purpose to these two stories, and it never comes together. And even if you were going to relate the relationships, I get it's common ground, but they're on two different levels. So it would have been magic for this movie to really take these two and really bind them on a relatable factor, a common ground factor, because the movie sets it up. We're on their territory. We have to follow their rules. there are culture differences between these two. And this would have been a perfect opportunity to show unity in a country and a time of war and in a relatable situation between two men, two women that are all dealing with conflict. And it really, to an extent, doesn't make sense on why we would have these two contradicting universes almost in characters that never really bind themselves, and it leaves it up to the audience in a vague context to kind of put the puzzle pieces together. I loved the performances, but I would have loved them to kind of tie the storylines together to really engage me.
And this is an interesting theory that I have when I was watching this movie, is because this is from like a British writer. They must have a very different dynamic between like officer and enlisted men in the British Army than Americans do. Because if we think about every American war movie, let's say MASH, Biloxi Blues, Good Morning Vietnam, there's always that contention between the officer and the enlisted men. And that's what usually causes the conflict and the plot progression of a movie, right? Like you've got the real shitty drill sergeant, or you've got the real kind of asshole supervisor, officer, what have you, that makes the grunt's life hell. And that's like a major point of conflict. This doesn't have that. Like, that's one of the things I noticed, is that there's very little conflict between the enlisted men and the officers, where that's what you would normally see in a movie that takes place during wartime. So maybe that's what it is because this is written from a point of view that is not familiar with the dynamic of the American army of the day and what those were like. And so it feels very bland and tepid, because I think there's a lot more structure when you think of like how the British army actually works. So you're getting a British writer with the idea of like British armies and regiments, but like trying to write through the guise of an American GI and his staffing sergeant. I think that's what it is. There's so little conflict in the ranks there that it feels out of place when we're watching a movie called Yanks about American GIs in Britain. That's the only way I can explain why they just don't feel like American soldiers, because there's no conflict. Like everyone's like pretty chill, and that's not usually how it goes.
And I think that's my main issue with the problem, that is a complete avoidance of conflict in the time of war, because there is conflict. It presents it, it hints around it. And we even have like the drunken nights at the bar that we see a lot of conflict, but it's just barely tame, except for the barkeep throwing piss on the two guys. So I think my main issue is it's well executed when it comes to look and some of the feel, but it just doesn't go far enough on the conflict to make me care.
I agree with you 100%. And that's where it's like, I don't think I'll watch this movie again, but I'm very grateful that I did have the opportunity to see it. So let's hear what our critics had to say about this one.
Okay, now when I went to see Yanks, I knew it was about World War II and American soldiers falling in love with British women. I also knew it was made by John Schlesinger, the fine English director who's made such top-quality films as Midnight Cowboy and Sunday Bloody Sunday. So, we have John Schlesinger doing a World War II romance. I thought he must have something special he wanted to say, but no, Yanks is a big surprise and disappointment. It's just a simple-minded Hearts and Flowers love story about an older, wiser, more mature couple and a couple of tempestuous young lovers. William Devane and Vanessa Redgrave are the more experienced folks. They have a relaxed, easy relationship. Forget the future. They just want to keep each other company now. He's a supply officer. She's a volunteer nurse. They're very good together. Unfortunately, there's not enough of the two of them in the picture. More time is spent with a younger couple, Richard Gere and Lisa Eichhorn. She has a boyfriend who's away fighting the war. Meanwhile, she and Richard Gere flirt with running away together to America.
I mean, he pretty much just said everything that we said, right? So he feels the same way about it. I think that the expectation is the same thing that you were expecting. It's like, yes, this is a very standard love story in wartime. So why does it feel so tepid? Well, because there's not a lot of conflict outside of it. I'm going to like maybe just put I'm going to presuppose that Schlesinger's mission with this movie was to make a war film without having to show the violence of war and the horrors and terror of war, right? And I think that's really played well in the earlier scenes where they talk about how, like, this is a holdover. No one's seen combat yet. So none of these guys have like the 1,000-yard stare. None of these guys are shell shocked. None of these guys have any kind of trauma yet. They are still in this like innocent phase where they haven't really broken the barrier of combat, conflict, and bloodshed yet. I think they'd be very different people afterwards. So I think that's the message he's trying to convey with this, is like, we can have a love story like this because these guys haven't been ruined by war yet.
And I can see that. And to the credit of the filmmakers and the writers here, is this is a very slippery slope to have war, romance, and have a united message and have kind of a direct line to make somebody feel something without tragedy, right? So I know in Love and War in 1996, that did it horribly. That just went to the commercial. Let's just make you feel all lovey-dovey with all the mushy crap. This one does add a little bit more depth to it, but it just doesn't go far enough. And Gene pretty much nails it. It's mushy fluff in war times. There's no way to properly really balance this with having a universal like for it. And it's not going to be appeased in vast audiences. So, but I will give it credit that it looks good. The attempt is good. And Gene pretty much nails it on his end on what probably a majority of audiences felt for this movie.
This is one of those star-crossed, mushy relationships. The kind of little kids go, yuck, at when they see them kissing on the screen. It's a sappy relationship. And Richard Gere, the guy in that last scene, he strikes me as a handsome but very self-conscious actor, always primping and gesturing in front of the camera. But my biggest complaint with Yanks is that it's a tired retelling of a tired old story. There's absolutely nothing fresh about Yanks, and that's shocking. I don't know why the director, John Schlesinger, made it.
I do have to agree with him there, because, I mean, it's fun to watch this early review of a Richard Gere performance, because this is before like his big breakout roles, and how he described him in this film, which in my opinion, this is the least primping for the camera I've ever seen Richard Gere do. They're like, oh, wow, you guys haven't seen anything yet. Just wait until the 80s and especially the 90s, right? But yeah, like I get their complaints and they're valid. Like, I'm not arguing with any of them, especially with the fact that like you said, this is a time where there was an expectation of what a romance movie should have been and what a war movie should have been. And this is neither of them. It is more classic Hollywood. It's more like a Casablanca, like you said earlier. Nowhere near as good or interesting, but that's the vibe it's going for. And that is, I think, hard to be a contemporary critic of that time and just be, I mean, 79, man, you're only like a year or two removed from Apocalypse Now. You know, you're only a year or two removed from so many great Coppola movies, from so many great Scorsese movies. You've got Attenborough doing some amazing things at this time. This doesn't feel like part of that, but that's just the era it came out in. Had this been in the early 60s, late 50s, shit, it could have been The Quiet Man, right? Like, it's very appeasing to that palate. It's just not the right time. And if that's one thing that we've noticed with these guys, is that they are so immersed in the contemporary films that they're reviewing that later down the road, some of the reviews seem so off base because those films we consider classics now, they weren't looked at that way when they came out, because the big films of the time were nothing like that. And I think that's where hindsight really comes into play, where we go back and we look at these retro films and these retro reviews. It's like, wow, I disagree with that review. Now, I don't necessarily disagree with this one, but like I said, like, the film doesn't fit for the time it came out.
Yeah, and it really doesn't. And I'm going to agree with Gene on this one, because even if I was 20 to 30 years old, if I heard that score and two people looking at each other in war uniforms, I would say yuck and walk down the hallway. So this is one that really does, I think, try to appease the female audience, the fantasy element, the loneliness that audiences felt. So, and I think this is almost, I don't want to call it cheap, because it's not, because it's a beautiful made movie, but I think it really does go and speaks to the director and the writer, where it comes to internal emotions that they wanted to reflect on screen. And it's hard to bash a movie like that because there's always an appreciation for the art that you see from an internal vision on a screen. And I think between Gene, he is being very respectful on trying to go between the lines on saying he recognizes it, but that doesn't mean it's a good movie. That doesn't mean it's a well executed movie. So this is one that I have a high respect on Gene and going into Roger to an extent that how they review this movie because it is a very careful review because you can see the love put into it.
No, I agree. And you have to hear Rogers to get that point of view. So here we go.
Well, I have a clue. There was something fresh about Yanks, and that's the grass and the trees and the vision that he has there. Maybe it was fresh in his memory. This might be something from his
own youth or something.
From his own youth, yeah. And he wanted to go back to it, and once he got back, he had this beautiful set decoration. He had all the props. He had the costumes. What to do with it? Who are the characters? What is their story?
Yes, he really doesn't.
He doesn't know. He just plays around with it. It's beautiful. After a while, it's over.
There's something in common with all the rotten movies on this picture. They all have one big gimmick and then no people. Make a movie about running in the Olympics. Make a movie about shards of glass going into somebody. Make a movie about roller disco. Make a movie about recreating England. But they all forget the people. Maybe they ought to start with the people and then come up with a place to put them.
Or maybe before they start making a movie, they ought to know why they want to make it. I guess, though, that of the 5 movies on this show, none of which we recommend, if you want to take a chance on one of them, certainly in terms of its physical beauty, we'd probably recommend Yanks.
So I think the part we have to talk about that is this was not a Dogs of the Week episode. This was just a regular episode. However, every movie they reviewed on this episode, they didn't like. It was one of those episodes where everything got a thumbs down. You had Head Over Heels, Running, The Legacy, and The Turning Point. And they give all those thumbs down, including this one. But they said of all those movies, this is the one that they actually like the best. So there is a compliment there. That is another interesting thing is like this era and into the 80s of the show, they had so many films that they didn't like. And then when a film that they did like comes up, it got all the praises in the world and overshadowed everything else. I feel like they were a lot more critical of cinema in the early days because there was less bullshit. There was less blockbuster summertime movies that they hated. And they actually were a lot more critical about the filmmaking itself in these early episodes. So I think you have to take that into consideration, at least for how we're going to grade these critics on their review. I really think that Roger is a secret champion for this film in the sense of like he really liked what the filmmaker was doing. And we've done this show 60-something episodes now. We know that if they had zero appreciation, they wouldn't have given the nearly 3 minutes of time to this movie to even have the conversations that they had about it. They would have just called it a dog. It sucks. Richard Gere sucks. It's boring. It's long. But to take the time to actually give it its laurels and the things that they appreciated, I think that actually tells a lot about how they felt about the movie, even though they didn't enjoy it as a theatrical experience.
I think with Roger, at the core of him, he really does feel for the filmmaking process. He does feel for the vision. He does feel for the nostalgic factor of it. And he absorbs all that. It's when there's no apparent attempt where he gets annoyed. And this is back where you had, 5, 6 movies maybe coming out each and every week. So there had to be a level of patience. And when you have a movie like this get released among some of the junk that gets released next to it, it's hard to turn an eye to the appreciation factor of what was trying to be attempted. These two understood the assignment. They understood what the director was going to do. It just wasn't well executed. And you can't hold a movie 100% accountable for the execution to an extent because you have to give extra credit to the attempt. And the attempt here is everything we see in the background when it comes to the technical aspects and the direction and all that we've spoken to. So it isn't a horrible movie. It isn't a perfect movie, but these two recognize the attempt of what it was trying to do. And especially with Roger, he's going to understand the nostalgic factor of it. We see that in numerous reviews with Roger, where he really goes back to his inner child and really speaks highly of some movies that went against the public, went against the press to really enjoy it because he felt a relatability to it. And that's the magic of movies is you're going to have that relatability factor. And the appreciation factor to it. And both of them saw it here.
This movie has just fallen through the cracks of time. Like, I had never even heard of this movie either. So on Letterboxd, only 1.5 thousand people have logged this movie. And I've got thousands of friends and followers on Letterboxd. Only 3 of people I follow or followed me have watched it and reviewed it. So that just goes to show that it's kind of like an obscure film now. I think box office has a lot to do with that. The budget was $6 million. It made something like 300,000 in the box office and barely broke $1 million in rentals. So it didn't have any legacy in that aspect. And we've talked about this before, there's not a moment, right? There's no moment that will show up on a highlight reel of cinema of the 70s or the 80s or love stories. It's all kind of a wash. That's, to me, regrettable because I think there's a lot of good movie in the movie, but sometimes, man, you got to have a moment to make a movie. I don't think that Officer and a Gentleman is that great of a film either, but it's got Louis Gossett Jr. cursing him out. It's got him saying, I've got nowhere else to go. And then the infamous scene at the end with Deborah Winger where she puts the hat on, right? Like, those are the 3 moments of that movie. Other than that movie's dog shit. If this movie had a few moments to it, then maybe we'd be talking about it some more, but it doesn't. It really is just flatline. And it really leaves it up to the objectivity of the viewer of whether or not it's going to be an enjoyable experience because there's no grabbing moment in the movie.
It tries to have that grabbing moment, but it's the last 2 minutes of the movie. And at that point,
it's literally the end. It's literally the end.
And at that point, it's not even earned to an extent. It's not really, you don't get that emotional attachment. You get the relatability for some that have kind of felt the loss of a love. I get that, but it is too far, too gone by the last 2 minutes for us to actually digest to actually get a reaction out of it. So it tries, but it needed to do it earlier.
The last 2 minutes of 2 hours and 20. Yep. You're not going to win them over by that point. And here's the thing too. I'm sure that if I would have seen this in the theater, in the cinema, I probably would have been bored out of my mind. There was something about the environment that I watched it in. Like, I was downstairs, I was on my couch, I had a scotch. I was set. It was perfect. I had no one bothering me. So I was able to enjoy the movie at my own pace and own time. I feel that if I would have been with a date on this movie or someone that wasn't enjoying it, that energy rubs off on you. So, and that's, again, it's like a fine meal, right? If a movie can be enjoyed solo, on a date, or with a group of people, if it can somehow figure out how to tie all those elements together, that's very clever of a filmmaker and of the performers that are in it. And that's like a special formula for a success. If this movie for me could only be enjoyed by myself being alone with a scotch, that's not the audience that's going to make you a bunch of money at the box office. I'm sorry.
I was really hoping for Ratzenberger to have a female that he can take home based on his Cheers character. I felt bad for that guy.
Well, you know what they say. Anyways, okay. So when it comes down to rating our critics here, I can't say anything bad about Gene's review. Like, it's really honest, and he takes the time to kind of explain where the elements of the film were missing, and I don't disagree with him. So I think it was a fair review. I'm going to give it a B.
Yeah, and I think this is one that they're both on the same page, and I think they're both in unison on how they feel about the movie. And I'm going to go a little bit higher, and I might be a little bit biased because Gene had a little bit better review, but I loved Roger's response to it, even though he didn't talk about the movie, but I loved how he gave some background of his thoughts of nostalgia with the filmmakers. So I'm going to give him about a solid 3.
The movie, I would say, I think I gave the movie 3.5 on Letterboxd, which is fine. It's good, and like I said, I enjoyed the viewing, but I don't have to watch it again. I'm not going to buy it. It's not going to sit on my shelf. So right there is like already proof enough that, it didn't make that big of an impact on me. Call it a pleasant surprise is probably where I'm going to go with it in my final critique of it.
I will never say to somebody not to watch this movie. I will just say, you know what? Everybody's going to have a different reaction to it. Honestly, there's some pluses or some minuses to this movie, but This is solely going to be based on how you relate to the situation, the relationship, and the characters. So there's no way to give a solid review to this movie other than the lack of storytelling and conflict, in my opinion.
I agree with that. Cool. All right, so next week, as we continue on this path of films that we haven't seen or heard of, my film comes from 1980. It's called Serial. Not the cereal that you eat, the cereal as in serial killer, which I still don't know why the movie's called Serial. I've watched it. I'm not going to give you my opinion on it yet, but it's a movie. So that one stars Martin Mull, Sally Kellerman, Tuesday Weld. For fans of the Halloween 3 movie, it's got Stacey Nelkin in it, and that's a lot of fun. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk about that one next week.
That should be a good one because I don't think I've seen that one. So that is going to be on my watch list this week. I can't wait for that one.
I hadn't even heard of it, man. And if you thought 1,500 people wasn't a lot on Letterboxd to review a movie, this one had even less. Like, I think it was around 300. So it's a very obscure movie. And I looked for podcasts that have talked about it. My friends at Vintage Video talked about it like back in 2021, but literally no one else has talked about this movie. So we're like kind of on uncharted ground with this one, man.
I can't wait for that one. This one is going to be probably the most unknown that I think we've talked about. I can't wait for it.
Yeah, definitely for me, for sure. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for watching, listening. Please give us 5 stars on your favorite listening platform. Please subscribe on YouTube. You can find me and my other show, the Cult Worthy Cinema Podcast, over at thecultworthy.com. And you can find my friend Justin Henson over at
themoviewire.com.
I will see you next week, my friend.
See you next week.